In the heart of Romania, the Carpathian Mountains rise in silence. For centuries, mist and shadow have hidden a legend that refuses to die. High on a rocky cliff stood Poenari, Vlad Tepes' mountain fortress, a stronghold of stone, shadow, and fear, the lair of a prince who ruled through terror. From his fortress above the misty forest, Vlad looked to the storm, to his people, a shield against invaders, to his enemies, a lord of terror. From his fortress at Targoviste, Vlad commanded his land with ruthless authority. For him, fear was the strongest weapon of all, and it was through terror that his legend began to spread. In the silence before battle, the empire of the Ottomans loomed like a storm on the horizon. Vlad's men stood unshaken, for their prince had taught them one truth, that fear itself could fight in their ranks. In the heart of the storm, steel a clash that would echo through history. And when the clash had ended, silence returned to the fog. The Ottoman riders drifted back into the mist, shadows fading, leaving only fear behind. When the invaders pressed deeper into Wallachia, fear struck before steel. And then they saw it. Not armies waiting, but forests of the dead. Vlad's message carved into wood and flesh, a silence louder than battle. Born the son of Vlad Dracula, he was heir to a troubled land. But as a boy, Vlad was taken hostage by the Ottomans, a prince raised in the shadow of his enemies. In Ottoman captivity, he learned the art of war. But even as a boy, Vlad's eyes burned with defiance. When Vlad returned to Wallachia, it was not mercy he carried home, but vengeance. To his people, Vlad's return brought not comfort, but dread. Whispers spread through the villages. Fear walked before him, heavier than any army. The boyars, the nobles who betrayed his father, soon learned that Vlad ruled not with mercy, but with fear. In his hall, power was no longer measured by loyalty or honor, but by terror. And here, the prince became the Impaler. At dawn, the work began. Wood was sharpened and hammered deep into the ground, not for shelter, but for terror. Each strike echoed like a warning across the mist. Vlad was building a fortress, not of stone, but of fear. Prisoners were led past the empty stakes, not soldiers in chains, but warnings in motion. Each step was a reminder of the fate that awaited in Wallachia. Chroniclers spoke of forests filled with the dead. Some claimed 20,000 impaled. The numbers may never be known. But for the Ottomans who turned back that day, the memory was enough. In Germany, the new printing press carried his name further than armies could march. Pamphlets of Vlad's cruelty became some of Europe's first bestsellers. The stories first spread by word of mouth, merchants and travelers speaking of a cruel Wallachian prince. Soon monks and scribes recorded them, turning rumor into written word. In town squares, pamphlets passed from hand to hand. What had begun as whispers in Wallachia now echoed in every market and tavern. Exaggerated drawings turned a ruthless ruler into a monster. For Europe, Vlad became more than a prince. He became the Impaler, a figure of nightmare. But his allies in Hungary saw more than a nightmare for the Turks. They saw a danger to themselves. To them, Vlad's cruelty was no longer a weapon of war, but a threat to Christian kings. In the autumn of 1462, Hungarian soldiers seized Vlad Tepes. Once a prince who ruled through terror, he was dragged away in chains, too dangerous to trust and too valuable to kill. For 12 years, Vlad Tepes remained a prisoner of Hungary. To some, he was a war criminal, to others, a pawn too useful to waste. In silence and shadow, his legend only grew. In 1474, after 12 years in captivity, Vlad Tepes was finally released. Older now, marked by exile and defeat, he stepped into the cold air, hardened, not broken. To his allies, he was a tool to be used. To his enemies, a threat reborn. From the walls of captivity, he returned to the open world, no longer a chained prisoner, but a prince once more, riding toward a land that remembered both his rule and his terror. In the villages of Wallachia, silence greeted his return. To some, he was a shield against the Turks. To others, the butcher had come home. In the halls of power, the boyars, the nobles who once betrayed his father, now bowed their heads in fear. Vlad did not need to speak. His presence alone reminded them that in Wallachia, loyalty meant nothing without terror. Vlad ruled through spectacle. Executions were not hidden. They were theater, designed to terrify nobles and peasants alike. Some were beheaded, many impaled, all left as warnings. Every punishment was a lesson carved into fear. As enemies gathered once more, Vlad turned to faith. In candlelit churches, he knelt before painted saints, seeking strength for the storm ahead. To his followers, he was a defender of Christendom, holding back the Ottoman tide. To his foes, he was a devil cloaked in piety, a man whose prayers, like his wars, sought not mercy, but power. In 1476, Vlad Tepes raised his banners once more. From villages and fortresses came peasants with rough spears, nobles in armor, and seasoned riders cloaked in fur. They gathered not out of love, but out of fear and vengeance. Against the Ottomans, Vlad promised them no peace, only war, where terror itself would ride beside them. Through shadow and mist, the army rode toward its fate. Banners hung heavy, horses sank deep into the mud, and still they pressed on. They carried no promise of glory, only the certainty that where Vlad led, death was never far behind. When the armies met, the field dissolved into chaos. Steel clashed against steel, hooves tore through the fog, and the screams of men and horses pierced the air. Wallachian riders struck Ottoman horsemen, each blow a struggle between survival and oblivion. As the clash faded, silence crept back over the field. Exhausted riders turned toward the forests, their faces hollow and their bodies broken. There was no triumph in their eyes, only the weight of what they had endured and the knowledge that survival itself was the only victory. In the mist of 1476, Vlad faced his last battle. Upon his horse he stood as both prince and executioner, feared by enemies and followers alike. To his men he was still a shield, to his foes a tyrant, but to history he was already becoming a legend. On the battlefield, Vlad Tepes fell. His body was swallowed by chaos. His grave never found, his fate shrouded in mystery. Yet his enemies spoke his name in whispers, and his allies remembered the terror he commanded. From death itself, his legend only grew stronger. So ended Vlad Tepes. Face down in the earth he once ruled. The prince who had lived by fear met his own silence. Yet silence did not bury him. In the centuries that followed, his story was reborn, transformed into the legend of Dracula. There is always more to discover. Subscribe for more.